Next up, I'd like to introduce our first panel conversation of the day, which asks the question, how companies can find their purpose. During the pandemic, the intersection of culture, purpose, and community has come into greater focus. What is the journey of discovery when a company's leaders want to identify an aspirational purpose? Who should have a voice among workers, managers, customers, and community members? What makes a purpose authentic? And how can a company's statement of purpose be turned into a constant message? These are a few of the questions that our executive panelists will address today. As our moderator, we're delighted to welcome back Lydia Dishman, a contributing editor for Fast Company and veteran writer on workplace issues and technology. I'll turn it over to Lydia now to introduce the rest of our expert panel. Lydia?
Thank you so much, Steve. And thanks again for being with me. You cannot see this now, but my pet is on my lap. I have a cat who often makes appearances on these webinars. She's just blending just below the screen level. Anyway, so we're talking about purpose, and because I'm a journalist and kind of a data nerd, I'm always looking for reports to sort of back up what I'm thinking about. And I just came across a recent McKinsey survey of more than 1,000 people from US companies. 82% affirmed that purpose is important, but only 42% reported that their company's stated purpose had much effect. So there's a disconnect there. And the problem, they said, in part, was that many companies' purpose statements are too generic. For instance, contributing to society and creating meaningful work are the two top priorities of employees in the survey, but they're just the focus of 21 and 11% of those purpose statements. So again, there's a big disconnect. To quote the authors of the report, what's needed is relatively clear. It's a deep reflection on your corporate identity, what you really stand for, which may lead to material changes in your strategy and even your governance, such as your status as a public company, private company, or public benefit. So how do you pull this off? Here are my experts who are going to help us with this question. We're going to go around the room. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And each of you, I want you to tell me briefly about your organization's purpose. Edie, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon or good morning, depending when you're joining from. So I'm Edith Devani Aronson. I'm leading the corporate responsibility, inclusion, and well-being for Amdocs, a tech company with 26,000 employees operating in 85 countries. Our purpose is, actually, we are within the 11% Lydia just mentioned. Our purpose is enriching lives and progressing society with creativity and technology for a better connected world.
Thank you. Charu, how about you go next?
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. Good to be here. So I am the Culture and Workforce Transformation Lead, specifically for digital transformation within NASA. We're going through a major transformation within NASA and really embracing a new culture and looking forward to what the new norm brings. We're, of course, very strong in our workforce and hoping to partner with external customers as well, as you've heard with SpaceX. And so really looking forward to those private partnerships, but really expanding what the culture is, not only within NASA, but also expanding that culture outward with our external partners as well. So happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. Graham, how about you go next?
Well, it's tough to follow someone who sends people to the moon, but I'll do my best. I lead social responsibility at Optum, which is a health services organization, and our mission and purpose is to help people live healthier lives and help the health system work better for everyone.
Casey?
Hi, I'm Casey. I'm joining here very early in the morning from Tokyo. So it's just trying to wake up. But yeah, I'm the CEO and the founder of Attuned.ai. And really our purpose and our vision is to bring intrinsic motivation to everyone to make work more meaningful. So that's our vision. So we're a software service using psychology to help with what we as humans kind of aren't good at sometimes, and that's to understand other people. So we help managers and teams understand each other's intrinsic motivations for work to have more meaningful conversations.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's an understatement, I would say, that we don't sometimes understand each other, especially now in a virtual realm. Last but not least, Karsten.
Thank you, Lydia. Hi, everybody. My name is Karsten Wagner. I'm the Vice President of People at Maven Clinic. We are a 200-person company based in New York City, and our company exists because we believe healthcare is outdated and our families are paying the price. So our mission is to change the health of the world, one woman, one family at a time. And may I just say, Charu, I put on my red tie today to celebrate you and everyone at NASA because I'm really excited about the landing tomorrow.
You know, my next question is going to be for all of you, but you know, NASA is really kind of taking the spotlight a lot in these discussions, particularly because when you're identifying and defining your purpose, it should be tied into obviously the organization's overall pain point that they're solving for. So like Casey said about, you know, understanding and, you know, healthcare. But Charu, you mentioned that things were changing this year. So can you just walk us through a little bit about how the organization identified and defined its purpose over the last year?
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody, for the kind comments. Really looking forward to the landing as well. I hope you get to watch it. As I mentioned earlier, our mission, of course, is evolving and has always evolved. I know based on the shuttle retirement, we have very strong partnerships with private sector now, with SpaceX, with launches and landings as well. But, you know, NASA is also involved with a lot more missions and really impacting the world from when it comes to science, climate change, satellites, looking at weather patterns. So those are very small impacts that we make that not many people know about, even to like the microwave chip that NASA developed a long time ago. So the transformation that NASA is going through in the last 2 years also was very much accelerated with two of their major efforts. One was digital transformation and the other was future work. And as you know, our work where we are as far as like workplace, workforce, and what the future looks like really got accelerated with the pandemic. And so that really helped us accelerate as well, finding our purpose very, very quickly with our workforce, with the 10 centers that we have, and really coming up with one unified vision and purpose for NASA, because all those 10 centers have their own mission, but of course we're moving towards one betterment of this world through science and technology. And so what was one of the key things that we implemented right away was really understanding and listening to our employees. I think that was the most effective way to really understand how we as leaders and of course employees can take a gauge of what's happening with the culture and how we can move it forward. So that's the biggest thing I think we made a change was embracing some of those listening tours, did a really quick culture hackathon as well to really figure out how can we take next steps forward with really impacting our employees on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to just saying, these are some of your culture attributes, go ahead and share those values with us. So we're really trying to embrace those day-to-day attributes within the employees and really listening to them on a regular basis as well. We're actually moving now towards maybe even having some nudges to them to change that behavior. But as you know, behavior change takes quite a bit of time. So we're moving the needle day by day, actually. Mm-hmm. Happy to.
As it happens. Idit, you want to explain how the organization identified and defined its purpose?
Yeah, actually, I have to say, first of all, that I feel I'm here representing kind of old school companies because looking at my fellow my colleagues here in this panel, you were all born with purpose. For us, you know, we are an IT company with software engineers writing codes. And for us, the discovery to actually have a purpose and have a purpose that, when people wake up in the morning and they want to have an impact, it was a quite interesting journey. And the way that we did it, and actually this purpose that I shared with you was launched exactly a year ago when we were still in the old normal that we all miss very much. And the way that we did it is in a process that was very, very inclusive. The entire population of the company, 26,000 employees, were invited to participate in the crafting of our purpose through active participation in different workshops, all the way to voting on the main ideas. So I think that this is one of the reasons why the day after people are very much connecting to this purpose, because they were part of crafting it, and it was a huge challenge in a company with, again, so many employees spread in so many areas and working in so many types of works. I think that looking at the pandemic, the story that we crafted just a year ago got a completely different meaning. I'm sure we'll talk about it later on in this meeting, but I'm really looking forward to touch it later in this forum.
Yes, definitely. I definitely want to dig into, the evolution of the past year. But, I think that you mentioned, being an old school brand, and, maybe a lot of people in the audience, Graham, I'm coming to you next, don't know Optum, but, you had mentioned when we spoke offline about emphasizing purpose over profits. And so can you talk a little bit about how the purpose was crafted?
Yeah, and I think too, this point that was just made around the evolution of purpose. So, we're mostly a business to business, though we're going more into the consumer space. So Aren't is known, but are part of United Health Group. So we're a Fortune 7 company, and Optum has a couple 100,000 employees, serves over 100 million people a year, 250 plus offices. So hard to have that alignment of purpose. And it really takes transformational leadership and then clarity of purpose within each department, team, et cetera. Charu talked about there's 10 different, kind of missions, but they all need to lead up into one. And so I think one of the challenges when you're at a large company is really thinking about how, in a good way, are you a cog in that machine of impact? And part of an individual purpose is understanding that you drive scale, you are part of the whole, and that without you, it can't happen, but ensure that the sort of shadow side of that doesn't occur where you have team members who feel lost. And so, I would say in all my career at a number of publicly traded companies running CSR, it's been transformational leadership at the top that starts. And you can have all kinds of initiatives. You can have like a groundswell of this is what our purpose is. But our CEO, Andrew Whitty, came in a couple of years ago. He had previously been the CEO at GlaxoSmithKline, where he was really a driving force in the pharmaceutical industry to ensure that in the developing world, life-saving medication was provided. And said at Optum, what does this look like to truly the second half of our mission, make a health system that works for everyone? So even before kind of the racial reckoning of the country this past year and the double pandemic of COVID, had already really pushed the organization towards health equity, and in his rhetoric and in his actions, which I think is the second part of it, right? You can have rhetoric, but then if your compensation doesn't change, if the way that you think about IOI doesn't change, or the way that you think about, how are you lifting individuals up? How are you hiring in an inclusive way, et cetera? And Andrew said, first of all, how are we going to do that boring stuff, the audits, et cetera, to really understand how do we do business? But then how am I going to be very clear to our employee base in investor shareholder letters where we talk about societal as well as financial return? In Q2, all we talked about was our impact on COVID. We didn't talk about we got to the finances, but we led with, our purpose. And so I think it's those things at the top of the house that then one leader down and one leader down and one leader down are able to align to and can point to the actions as well as the rhetoric. So at a large scaled organization, that's how we try to think about how do you have that kind of wave of purpose driven with the oomph behind it of how we do business.
Yeah, and I definitely want to dig deeper into the sort of authenticity piece of that, but I want to make sure that everyone answers this one. So Casey, who are the stakeholders responsible for crafting your message on purpose?
Yeah, so we're a startup and I am the founder, so I kind of get a say, right? There was a reason that quit everything, took the risk, and created it. But as we come to kind of what is our mission statement, what is our goals, and to be honest, like one of my failings, like doing a startup and kind of growing through it, is like the value side of it. So it's connected to purpose and how those purposes, are kind of shown through behaviors. But like when we started the company, I just thought, hey, our values are there, type of thing. And like, we never actually wrote them down. So, we kind of had like a mixed company. People were not fully aligned because the values were not clearly stated and written down. And then we could not have the expected behaviors that we want kind of within the organization. And kind of as a naive founder, it was like, hey, I thought we were smart, great people. This is what we're trying to do, bring psychology and intrinsic motivation through software and help organizations. We're all nice people, but it was still going in many different directions. So kind of like what was said before, but on a much smaller scale, we did it inclusively to write down the values. So ask the whole team, what do you think we are? And then go back and forth with kind of the executive leadership team as well. But still, as we're growing, as we're getting bigger, we're, helping different markets, I think our similarities with a larger firm is I kind of look at, is a leader's job in crafting purpose is like a creative director going into kind of a new fashion house. You have to go look at the old catalog, kind of see the history, what is there, and pull out some of those stories, right? And okay, here's something from the past, here's the story now, and just kind of connect it through to everybody as well is what the leader needs to do.
Karsten, yes, I'm coming to you next, but I just have to comment on the fact that I don't think that I've ever heard anyone refer to a fashion house as an example for something like this, but that's very cool. Thanks for saying that. And Karsten, you were going to start, but also, did you mention how many people are working for Maven now? Because we're juxtaposing with all of these larger companies.
Right, so we're about 200, so much smaller. But it's so interesting that the principles remain the same no matter how small or large you are. And so I think Casey's right in that when you think about a mission, a purpose, what are we doing? Of course, that has to come from your leadership team, your founder, even why was the company founded? What do you want to accomplish? But how you do it, that's different. Those values really matter. And to what others were saying, making sure that you're not only nudging those behaviors, how are we going to work in order to accomplish our mission, but rewarding them too. Like Graham said, how do you add that oomph? It's one thing to get everyone together, like you did mention, and I've done that too, that exercise. Everyone's involved in putting together the mission, but you can't stop there, right? So you get a perfectly crafted sentence or two, excellent. How do you live it, right? Are you adding it to your hiring, to your performance management, to your recognition and rewards? All of these pieces really matter. And I think it gets to the authenticity that I know you wanted to talk about, Lydia.
Yeah, I definitely, because I think that, internally in an organization, people can sniff out when things are inauthentic because they're there and they can see it. But I think that there's a flip side of that where whatever your outward facing stakeholders are, your consumers, your clients, they can sense it too. So what makes a purpose authentic, and how can you avoid that sort of performative aspect of it? And again, I'm going to do the round robin. So Idit, well, I'm going to come to you first.
Sure. I think in today's world, what you see from the inside is what you also see from the outside. I think that we are in an era where, with everything being so transparent, so outside, I can even tell for ourselves, many of the initiatives, the internal communication initiatives that we have inside, we're actually using our social media channels in order to get to our employees, right? Because everything is in the inside and in the outside is together. So I think that now more than ever, everything is out there. So I agree with you that if in the past you had to be an employee in order to know what's the corridor, today the corridor is out. So this is the first comment I have. The second is that I'm looking at my hat as the head, looking at corporate responsibility. So For us, the fact that we are doing, our product serves billions of people around the world, this is great, but we're not stopping there. We're working with the communities around us, and the work that we're doing with the communities and doing the same. So it's like taking our purpose and trying to do the same for our communities is something that we're doing, but not by ourselves. It's almost like, it's a philosophy of us to not do it by ourselves. So we are taking with us our suppliers, our customers, and we're doing it together. And I think that in these moments in time, when you're going hand in hand to address a grand challenge, most pressing issue that the world is facing, this is where you see the real culture coming into place.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned community, because I think that that is a really big part of authenticity, is what you are carrying out into the community that you serve. Charu, what do you say about authenticity?
I think it's a very valid concern right now, especially where we are and at leaders. I think it also talks to psychological safety, right? If you feel as a leader and as an employee and as a team member that you are in the zone where you feel safe and that you feel that your leaders hear you and are authentic and vulnerable, then you are more open and prone to actually taking those risks, taking those steps towards innovation. I think authenticity to me is one more step closer to having that psychological safety and being able to just having the need to be heard and to listen as well. I think the culture that we have at NASA and we're progressing towards is some of those attributes and the networks that we have already. How do we realize those networks, but then making sure that we are inclusive in that, and there's equity and there's those connections throughout the centers and throughout our missions are embedded in those on a day-to-day basis. The biggest thing, of course, is for us is how do we make sure as a government agency that I know we take risk, we make mistakes, but how do we learn from those mistakes, right? We've had that culture embedded already as NASA, not only throughout the shuttle, but even moving forward, is we make mistakes and leaders realize that, and it's okay to speak up and I know we always talk about like, let's celebrate success, but it's also fun to celebrate some of those mistakes and really find out what happened and what we can learn from that. That is the only way to move forward from that.
Absolutely. Carson, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, that really resonated with me, especially the piece about inclusivity. I think about our line of work, women's healthcare. So much in women's health is still so stigmatized that we find that being authentic to our purpose internally and externally comes down to storytelling and telling our members stories internally so our employees recognize the stakes of their work. There are new humans in this world because of the work we do at Maven, but externally as well. And really not being afraid to call out some of the real challenges that people struggle with, specifically around mental health, that helps us stay true to who we are and what we do.
Graham, it doesn't get much more authentic than having a CEO like the one you described, who really sounds like he's behind all of the efforts there. But is there something else that helps the purpose be more authentic?
Yeah, and I'll build on a couple of the points on inclusivity and the psychological safety and be a little bit provocative, because there's a couple things that really bother me on purpose is when you hear someone talk about like, I got to do my day job, but then I get to volunteer, or then I get to do this. And it's like, what are we doing as a company if, Karsten's point, you don't feel like the thing that you do for the majority of the time is aligned to your personal mission and to the corporate mission? And what are we doing as companies if we're not creating an environment that enables risk-taking? So to keep up my fanboy status of our CEO, like an example of his prior company that he told when he came in, and goes to Karsten's point on storytelling. He was like, at Glaxo, we had some scientists who never found anything, in essence, like commercially useful, but you need some of that in order to find the others. And so, any company, I would ask the question of like, are you incented the same way if you take a smart risk and fail as you are if you succeed? And then, a step further, it's like, where are we credible? So, I'm not saying, hey, every company shouldn't go into communities or something like that. But if Optum is going and working with refugee women in Bangladesh, that's a nice thing we're doing, but that's not really where we should be focused, because it's not where we have our highest and best use. So I'm not saying we shouldn't, but sometimes it's kind of like, I think your authenticity of purpose has to be aligned, even if it's not kind of the hot thing now or whatever it would be, into how can we make the biggest difference? And how do we really think about that in a way of not necessarily just doing good and doing well, which sometimes can happen, but like Milton Friedman's, cohort would say, we'll go ahead and do good and do well. As a company, when you're doing things that you're not sure if you're going to do financially well on, but you're doing good, and you're really thinking about your total societal return, to me, that's when it gets really interesting, and you get out of like the dirty little secret of CSR where everybody wants to just say, oh, everything furthers the business and everything helps. Like if we're truly authentic to purpose, there are going to be things that potentially put the company and individuals within the company at risk because you are working towards furthering important just ends. And you have a fiduciary, if you're public, you have a fiduciary duty to your shareholders. So I don't say that flippantly, like you need to just, oh, who cares about profits? Because as the Sisters of Charity would say, no margin, no mission. But also, how do you really think through what is the way that you can put all of your assets, all of your capabilities, all of your scale? And I'm, of course, speaking from a big company perspective, but I think Carson laid it out beautifully from a smaller, how do you tell those stories? How do you show purpose? And I think only then do you build authenticity, because otherwise you're doing marketing, you're doing talent retention, you're doing engagement, all of which are valuable and is still furthering the world. But I don't think you have fully lived into your purpose as an organization or kind of been behind your colleagues and letting their life song sing as loudly as possible in whatever they want to impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's, as you mentioned, there is certainly a part of this that ties into not just engagement and retention, but also attracting talent. But Casey, I wanted to ask you though, I feel like it's almost impossible for a smaller startup not to be authentic because, like you said, I mean, you're the guy. So, but how do you find more authenticity?
Certainly, like I think we're authentic in warts and all, right? And as you're building a startup and as you're growing, there's a lot of mistakes, and those are clearly visible internally, and sometimes to your customers and partners as well. But this kind of discussion about psychological safety. So this is really what we do. We work with organizations and a lot of larger organizations to help increase their level of psychological safety. And kind of what Graham mentioned is, it's when you have strong psychological safety within an organization, you can take more risk, right? You will have more innovation. You'll have more authentic conversations between people. So I think this psychological safety is very key. Chadu mentioned, okay, it's the leadership being vulnerable. And I think that's certainly one component, and it's modeling the behaviors of what is this purpose. But the other part is the understanding. And I think it's the mutual understanding. And this kind of comes back to what Graham was talking about, the link in the chain. Like when you hire somebody new, a new person walks in the door, they join this mission. Hey, I've joined this company. I'm really excited to what we're doing here. But they're coming in with their own like fingerprint of intrinsic motivations. Like what we found is there's 1.7 million different combinations of intrinsic motivation. So this is where it's very difficult for that line manager to understand this individual. Hey, they come in all excited, but then that line manager just doesn't understand them as an individual and has a hard time pushing the right button to connect to that purpose, even if they have the right intention. So that's where kind of the breaks in the chain really come. And I think, how can you help like the managers that have to work with kind of the staff and the team members really executing to have that mutual understanding? Okay, this is how they want to, be motivated as an individual. This is how I need to communicate them. And I think that's what most organizations struggle with. How do we have mutual understanding, as individuals, while encompassing this overall purpose? And that's what we want to assist with. And really, I think everybody employees on that learning curve to get a little bit better at.
Yeah, I mean, if you cannot communicate this authenticity, this system of values, this, culture, it's not going to hold. And so communication becomes, I think, one of the, if not the foundation of having a successful purpose that does connect employees, that does connect external stakeholders. So what is it about the way that your organizations communicate that makes this work? Hand raise. Who wants to take this one first? Go ahead.
If I can steal 20 seconds just to going back to challenging Graham that challenged us, and then I promise I'll answer your question. I want to encourage everyone who is also on the line to allow ourselves. I agree with you 100% with your agenda that if we need to connect between what are we here to do in this world and the work that we do in the communities, but sometimes we need to allow ourselves not to be so judgmental or to leave room for things that don't make sense. Because in my years of experience, I was like, yes, digital inclusion, this is what we need to do. This is what we do for life. We need to connect everything. But then some of our employees say, no, we want to work with shelters for animals. There is zero connection to anything that we're doing. But this is what powers them. And the fact that as a company, we allow them to have some freedom to do things that are outside of the strategy, this is what gives them the purpose. This is what makes them to feel that, hey, I work in a company that lets me fulfill my passion, although it's completely unrelated to the things that we're doing. So I'm like 95% agreeing with you, and then 5% urging all of us to kind of allow for these.
And that's a really good point though. So let me just rephrase my question then and say, how is it that you communicate the ability to go outside the purpose and make people feel like they can do that?
So, and this is where I think it connects to everyone's point around psychological safety. But I think that it's really about, first of all, having communication, which is not taken for granted. The fact that you have communication channels, that you hear from your leaders, that you see diversity of leaders talking to you, that you have different channels. Some of them are in person, some of them are mass emails, some of them are coming in different ways, shapes and forms. How are you giving visibility to people who are different from you to raise their voices, and what channels do they have? So A is to have this constant communication, and to have it and I think it's measured mostly when it's the hardest. If you had a very bad quarter, or if you are having some layoffs, or this is where you're being measured for your. It's very nice to communicate when everything is great. The biggest question is how do you communicate, and how vulnerable are you allowing yourself to be when you communicate? So it's very much connected to our entire discussion on authenticity. And it also connects to previous comment around the room to fail, and the confidence that you have that no one wants to fail. We are not into failures, but failures are part of the game. We need to learn from it. So communicating about them, and I can tell you that in Amdocs we did one of our senior leadership conferences. It's like the top leaders of the company. We had a whole session about, in a pub setting, over drinks, celebrating our failures. And it was an amazing experience because people were, suddenly it's cool to talk about a failure, and it's part of it. So it's communicating in different shapes and forms, and also when things are super good, but also when they're super challenging.
Absolutely. Okay, I got the dueling Graham and Karsten both want to. So Karsten, you go first.
I'll go fast. So communication, everything everyone has said makes perfect sense, of course. But I do think that one way that maybe is unexplored sometimes is policies, right? Like what policies are set in terms of what benefits, what allowances, what types of stipends for volunteering, et cetera, that you're describing. That's a way of communicating to employees too, and it's a powerful one. So what is a rule, what is encouraged, what is discouraged? That's a way of communicating to, and a way of really infusing a purpose or values.
Absolutely, and also reinforces authenticity because you have to stand behind what you're saying that you do. Graham, go ahead.
Yeah, Carsten, I think that yin and yang of what is said and what is unsaid needing to be aligned is so important. And then Edith, your pushback, which I very thoughtful and made me think about, you know, how do we create that almost virtuous circle of here is what we were made to do as an organization, and we want you to align to those values, and we want to know what you were made to do, and we want to come behind you and support you. And so, you know, our pro bono infrastructure will be behind where you volunteer, and, you know, this will happen. And so, for instance, for me, I live with individuals coming out of prison and help folks who are coming out of incarceration launch businesses. I'm much better at my job because I have that level of personal involvement and commitment. And, you know, you could say I abuse my position, you know, as head of social responsibility to sort of support some of that work, but it, you know, brings a lot of meaning. I'm able to align in. And, you know, if you can do that, in our case, 185,000 times, well, you've created, you know, this double impact, and where people feel like I am known, I am valued, people care at the organization on what I care about, and I care about what we're doing. So I think it's a really good point, and I amend my.
And I love your circle example. It makes perfect sense. So thanks for that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And last point, just going to Casey, I think to this idea of purpose as well, one stat that is mind-blowing to me, and I'm going to make up the exact percentage, but like people at startups volunteer like 95% less. Yeah, it's like a pitch deck, right? You just, people at startups volunteer like 95% less than people at like mid to large sized corporations. And I was always like, I think that's because, you know, there's an infrastructure at corporations, et cetera. But when you look at the interviews and some of the qualitative, it's because everybody at startup feels like I'm putting everything I've got into this startup, and, you know, it's so exciting and everything else. And so I always try to study these startups of like, what's the secret sauce of just, you know, we're all in this together and we're staying up all night to do this work. And I'm like, nobody at Optum staying up till 2 a.m, you know, coding. And so, you know, there's the positive, and again, it's this light and shadow, but like of an infrastructure and of support and of this shared mission, but also how do you get that energy of a startup with purpose? And so again, you know, it's the virtuous circle maybe, et cetera. But just as Casey was talking, it was making me think of that statistic as well.
Casey, you want to add something?
I think it comes really down to the storytelling, right? So like, you know, a startup is a story. We're trying to create something, you know, just it's only energy and it's only people that we have. But I think even with larger organizations, it's like, you know, the man in the hole story concept, right? So this is where, okay, you start out all right, but then all kinds of bad things happens. It gets really, really difficult. You're kind of, oh, it's horrible. And then you start kind of going back up and you end up in a much better place. And, you know, I think it's that kind of story that's really what a startup is, right? Where, you know, you're struggling to survive. You're struggling for anybody to listen to, hey, we got this great service or this product, right? You're struggling, you know, without enough resources to make your customers happy. So I think if you can take that, you know, man in the hole kind of story and bring that to the purpose, that can get a little bit kind of deeper excitement, right? And, you know, as humans, it's stories that resonate with us and that really kind of drive our energy.
And I think that the man in the hole is the story of the past year, right? Like,
we've been
down,
in the hole.
that kind of like, okay, we're going. I think it's a perfect story of the year of COVID. Hopefully, we are totally in this.
We're starting to come out of the hole now.
Let's see that this is not circular to Graham's example.
Carsten, did you want to add something else?
I just wanted to say one thing really quickly around the authenticity we were talking about mission in general. So for everybody listening, these are fairly high level concepts, but I think it all comes down to hiring. It all comes down to hiring well. To answer Graham, like what's the difference between somebody who wants to stay up till 2 a.m. or not? It's who you hired, right? And what they bring. So I think there's something to really understanding your mission and your values and really spending the time to create a rigorous interview and hiring process. You build the company that you need to have and want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that as I said before, I think that having a strong sense of purpose, an authentic one, even one that's evolving, like at NASA, although they have, that's not always the best example because everybody knows what NASA is and that attracts talent anyway. But you are going to get people that, at least at the first layer are aligned. Graham, did you agree with that or not?
I think in all of these things on panels, we have to say this, one thing and say it's all this. And so I think, all of us do that a little bit, but I'll even use the NASA story, which, probably everybody has heard. The Kennedy's going in and it's during the lunar launch and asks a janitor, what do you do here? And he says, I put a man on the moon. And, I don't know that individual. That may be an exceptional individual, but I think the idea of you have such aligned purpose, you have such clarity, you have expectations of what everyone is doing that leading up to it is incredibly important. And to Karsten, your point, it's important to hire as well. So I think like the thing that's been really enriching for me on this panel is I think all of this is right, and all of us are going to lean to a little bit more and maybe I lean bigger company. And so therefore I'm sort of like, here's the infrastructure. We have to think about scale. That's all that's important. And then a really good point is made on community and a really good point is made on hiring. Right. But I think it's like, that's the interesting thing about purpose is it's all of the above is the answer.
Right. Well, we only have a couple of minutes, but Charu, I wanted to ask you again, just to explain again how you're reinforcing the value system, the culture, because I think that's important, and whatever other comment you wanted to add, we just have a couple more minutes.
Sure. From a NASA perspective, our value, our purpose is still very strong. And so thank you for all the panel members to use some of those amazing NASA examples. I think going back to, I think Karsten made a comment about HR. I have to tell you, once you have those purpose, values, goals defined very clearly, it is very easy to attract the right talent, right? And to retain the talent. And when I talk about retaining talent, we have talent that has been here for 30, 40 years. And that's not very typical of government either. NASA, we have an employee that's 87 years old and going strong and has no desire of leaving NASA because this is what he loves to do every single day. I asked him, I said, what makes you stay here? He said, the fact that I just work here at NASA is fulfilling enough for me every single day. And he works in procurement, which is just, he's not even related directly to the mission, but the fact that he's supporting the mission, it feels more empowering to him than anything else. So I just wanted to share that thread, a common thread with all the panel members here, that it's just have that purpose, make sure that each and every individual knows and has clear expectations, and the talent will be there.
All right, well, I think that is our time. So I'm going to thank you all, Charu, Idit, Graham, Karsten, Casey. You all shared some very enlightening and insightful commentary, and I'm sure that the audience is going to be taking away these anecdotes and putting them into practice in their own organizations. So thank you all so much. Steve?